Hey everybody, Ryan here at etrailer.com. Today on our 2019 Ram 1500 Classic, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 air spring kit. Before we get started, what we'd like to do is take a few measurements of our Ram with no weight in the bed of the truck and with the factory suspension. That way we can have a good baseline to go off of whenever we do put weight in the bed and after we get our airbags installed. Here at the front, if we go from the ground to the edge of our wheel well, it's going to be right about 36.5 inches. And here at the rear, take that same measurement, it'll be 39.5 inches. So now we went ahead and added a considerable amount of weight to the bed of our truck, and now we can take those same measurements to see how it affected our suspension. So here at the front, take that same measurement from the ground. The edge of our wheel well is about 37.5 inches. And here at the back of the truck, you can tell it's really kind of squatting down. From the ground to that wheel well liner, it's about 35.5 inches. So how that weight is affecting our truck, back squatting down, which in turn is raising the front of the truck up, and that's going to affect a few things. It's going to put that more or less unnecessary wear and tear on our suspension back here and really just decrease the overall life and performance of it. And with the front of the truck being higher, what that's going to do is angle our headlights up, possibly another motor size, not on the road where we want them. It's really going to affect our tire wear. Now that our tires don't have a full contact pattern on the ground, it's going to decrease the life of those. And not to mention, it's going to really affect our steering and braking performance with all that weight back here. Now what we can do is go ahead and run our truck through the test course with all the weight in the back to see how it performs. So we'll get going here, and we're going to first approach our speed bumps and see as we kind of straighten out and get going over them. And right away, just over these first few bumps, you can almost feel that suspension. It almost feels like it's going to bottom out. This really feels rough back there. You can even feel it up here in the wheel. Each bump, the wheel's kind of wanting to go from side to side. And it's a little tougher to kind of keep straight. You're just kind of, feels like you have to fight it a little bit more to point it where you want to go. Keep in mind, that's only going a couple miles an hour over these bumps too. Now we can pick up a little speed and do some evasive maneuvering through our slalom course. So as I go side to side, this is where you can really feel that weight. You can definitely feel it kind of pushing us around, a lot more body roll. And in my opinion, this is kind of a more realistic driving situation where you're going to be making a lot more turns like this. And this is that point where it's not going to perform as good as you would like it to. So we'll keep going a little bit, maybe get a little more speed to see how it reacts. And it doesn't get any better, it gets worse. So in my opinion, this is an issue that I wouldn't be too happy with whenever I'm pulling a heavy trailer or carrying something really heavy. Now with the airbags installed, we went ahead and put that same amount of weight in the bed of the truck, and we can take those same measurements. That way we can kind of compare the numbers. Here at the front, from the ground to the wheel well, be right about 37 inches. And here at the back, from the ground to the edge of the wheel well, it's right about 39 inches. So the truck still has just a little bit of a squat. Numbers are just a little off from the factory ride height with no weight. But keep in mind, I only put 60 pounds of air in the bags. So what we could do is fill them up a little bit more and find that exact level ride height. So I went ahead and adjusted our air pressure, and now the truck is riding exactly at that factory ride height with no weight. And so what the airbags are going to eliminate is that squatting in the bed, or in the back of our truck rather. Our headlights are no longer pointing up at the sky. We have full tire contact with the ground. That's really going to help improve our ride, our comfort, and our steering and suspension and braking performance. Now measurements are one thing, but how the truck actually feels and rides is another. So let's go ahead and run it through the test course and see how it improved. So again, we'll first start by going over our bumps. Straighten out here and hit the first couple. And right away, as soon as the back tires hit those bumps, much better. You can feel the suspension has a lot more travel. It doesn't feel like it's going to bottom out. We're not getting tossed around in here nearly as much. A lot more comfortable. Steering wheel's hardly even affected. If you go over the bumps, I don't even have to hold it. It's staying straight. So overall, definitely notice an improvement, at least over our bump course. So now we can go through our slalom, which I'm really interested to see how our truck performs because it wasn't all that great before we got the bags on. So we'll kind of pick up some speed and do some evasive maneuvering. And these first couple turns, I'll tell you, much better. Not nearly as much body roll, a lot easier to control and steer. We're just not getting tossed around like we were. It just feels like our suspension isn't getting worn out or worn down as much. Just a lot more comfortable ride, a lot more predictable. If we did ever have to make an evasive maneuver, I'd feel a lot more confident. So overall, I was a little bit surprised on how much the air springs actually improved our ride. That's because honestly, the Ram really wasn't terrible before, but you don't really know how bad it is until you see that major improvement. This is what the air springs are going to look like once they're installed. Now the air springs are going to just simply replace the factory style jounce bumpers. Now these jounce bumpers really don't do a whole lot other than really just prevent the suspension from bottoming out. As to where the air springs, these are going to continuously support our suspension, giving us a much more comfortable ride. Now there are some different types of suspension enhancements other than the air springs. One of them being timberings, for example, just to name one. And a lot of those, what they do is replace these jounce bumpers. However, they're pretty much the same thing, they're just a little bit larger. So the main difference between that style of suspension enhancement versus the air springs is that the air springs are going to give us that continuous support, as to where the jounce bumper style is really only going to give it when we absolutely need it. So they're really not going to make the ride much more comfortable or anything like that. Now there is an upside, if you will, to the jounce bumper style, and that is that they're maintenance free. Once you have them installed, don't need to do anything with them. As to with the air spring, they do require just a little bit of maintenance. They do have a minimum air pressure. So every now and again, especially during extreme temperature changes, you will have to come out and check the air pressure and make sure you have that minimum 5 pounds in your bag. Now to make life a little bit easier to do that, you can actually get a compressor kit for the air springs, and that way conveniently from inside of the truck you're able to inflate or deflate your bags to have that maintenance done and not have to worry about it. And that compressor really does come in handy too, especially if you're towing different types of trailers. You can fine-tune that air pressure because these air springs go all the way up to 100 psi, so you have a wide range of adjustment. So you're able to fine-tune it really easy and find that sweet spot for that trailer you're hauling. Now, these are going to have a weight carrying capacity of up to 5,000 pounds, but keep in mind these aren't actually going to add to the overall weight capacity of your truck. Now, if you're not sure what the weight capacity of your truck is, you can always find that in your owner's manual. So ultimately, whatever enhancement you choose is really just going to depend on what you plan on using your truck for. If you tow the occasional trailer, the jounce bumper style may be a little bit better of an option if you're just looking for a little more support. However, if you're towing a lot of different trailers or you're looking for that ultimate comfortable ride, the air spring, in my opinion, would be the way to go. To begin your install, what you're first going to want to do is temporarily remove your spare tire. That way it'll just give you a lot more room to work. Now if we move over to our axle, just above it we're going to have this factory jounce bumper. We're going to need to pull that out, so you can just grab it with your hand and just work it out, set it to the side as we won't be reusing it. Now what we're going to have to do is remove this jounce bumper cup, and this is actually welded on, so we want to cut it nice and flush. So what I'm going to use is a Sawzall. However, you could use an angle grinder or cut off wheel, something like that, to get this removed. So now with that jounce bumper cup out of the way, what we need to make sure is that this area here is perfectly flat. So in my case, there's still a little bit of material here left from that cup, from cutting it with the Sawzall. So what I'm going to do is just take a grinder and grind that down nice and flat and flush with this surface. So this is what it should look like once you're done. You want it to be nice and flat and even completely across this whole surface here. Now, since we did grind some of the paint off, it is a good idea to take some spray paint and just cover that bare metal. That way we don't have to worry about any rust or corrosion issues. Now what we can do is grab our upper bracket, and what we're going to do is take this small bolt here, it's a hex head bolt, and drop it down through this oblong hole. And you want to make sure that the head of the bolt is on the side where this flange comes up like this. And on the back side, we're going to take a nylon lock nut, get that started, and then we're just going to tighten it down enough to where the bolt's relatively tight, but we're still able to move it because we're actually going to use this as an alignment device. So I'll grab a 6mm Allen key. We'll hold the nut with a 1/2 inch wrench and just snug it down. If you get it too tight, just loosen it up a little bit. And that's about how you want it. You want to be able to relatively easy adjust that bolt. So the way this upper bracket is going to work is ahead of that bolt that we just put in it. That's actually going to line up with this hole right here in our frame. So we'll line the head up with it. What we're trying to do is this flange here that goes up, you want that to sit as flush as possible the outside of our frame rail. And so what we'll do is hold that nice and tight in place, and then we're going to take a marker or paint pen like this. There's going to be a smaller hole right here, and you're just going to make a dot. That way we can drill out an opening. So you have the dot made, you can set this off to the side for now. Now that we have our dot made here, what we're going to do is drill a 1/4 inch hole. We'll take our drill bit and carefully center it and create that opening. So now that our hole is made, we can take one of these bolts, and these cut their own threads essentially. So what we're going to do is get this started. We want to try to get it as straight as possible. So I like to just kind of get it going by hand. And I'll take a ratchet and get at least the first few turns started this way. And then once you're confident it's going in nice and straight, what you can do is come back with a power tool and run it down, or you can just continue to do it by hand. It's kind of your call. Once you run it all the way down flat, then we're just going to pull it out now that the threads are cut. We're going to use this same bolt. You're going to take your bracket, put it in place, and take that same bolt, get it started, and we can tighten it down. Once we have it snug, we'll come back with the torque wrench and tighten it down to the amount specified in the instructions. Now, something I want to mention from this point on, any of the hardware that we're going to torque, the specification can be found in your instructions. At this point, we can begin to pop out our coil spring from underneath the truck. So what you want to do is take a marker and draw a straight line from the coil spring down to the axle. That way we can put it back in that exact position. Now what I like to do is just do a couple of them. That way we know we're 100% spot on when we go to put it back. Since I'm using a drive-on lift, the method I'm going to use is going to be a little bit different than for those of you at home for the most part. But what you'd want to do is use a floor jack and a jack stand to jack up your truck. And you want to jack it up from the frame of the truck. And you want to get it up high enough to where your rear wheel comes off of the ground and your axle is hanging down freely. Now that our truck is supported and our tire's off the ground, we can go ahead and remove it. So I'll grab a 22mm socket and get these lug nuts removed. Just pull our tire off and set it to the side. Now, whenever we take our spring off, as well as loosen up our shock, there's going to be nothing actually supporting the axle. So what you want to do is either use a pole jack like I have here, a floor jack would even work, something like that, just to put a little bit of pressure on the bottom of the axle. That way it's supported while we get everything removed. So we need to loosen up the bottom bolt here that holds our shock absorber in place. So there's going to be a 21mm nut on one side, and the bolt head is also going to be a 21mm. We'll take our socket and our wrench to hold the other side still and get that removed. Just take your ratchet and turn the head of the bolt. Either way, we need to get this out so the bottom of the shock absorber will be free. Now the spring is actually relatively loose in here, but it still can be a little tight trying to just get it out with your hands. So to make it a little easier, you can just take a pry bar, kind of carefully pry the bottom of it, and get it up and over that bump there on the bottom. And once it clears that bump, the spring will essentially just fall right out. Carefully pull it out. Just set it to the side for now. So with that spring out of the way, now we have plenty of room to access our upper bracket, and we're going to use the holes here as a guide to drill out 1/4-inch holes. That way, once those holes are drilled out, we can run some hardware in there. Try to center it as best as you can and get them drilled out. Now these two bolts that we're putting in are the same as that other one that we did, the ones that cut their own threads. So we're going to use that same method, kind of get them started by hand, and then we can come back and run them down if we decide to do it that way. And once we have them tight, we can come back with our torque wrench and get them completely torqued. With that upper bracket all secured, now we can get our coil spring reinstalled the opposite way that we removed it. Just want to make sure that when we put this back in, that the lines that we made all line up. With all that back together, we can now take our wheel and get that put back on. Now we can start to assemble our air springs here. So we're going to work with the top of the air spring. We know it's the top because there's 3 threaded fittings, unlike the other side, which there's just 2. So that's the bottom, that's the top. Take our roll plate and just lay that over. The 2 holes in the roll plate will line up with 2 of the holes in the air spring, and the other hole will allow us access to this one. We take our air fitting, and what we're going to do is thread that into this opening here. And so we're going to get it in as tight as we can by hand. And then we can come back with a 1/2-inch wrench, and we're going to tighten it an additional 1.5 turns. Just like that. Now what we can do is take our upper spring bracket, this square piece here, and lay it flat on our airbag. We're going to secure it to the airbag using these button head bolts. They're going to have Allen keys in the center, and that's how we're going to tighten them down. So We're going to get them lined up and get each one started hand tight. Once we have them going, we can come back and tighten and torque them. So what we can do now is flip our airbag over. I want to point out that this fitting, you're going to want this to face towards the outside of the truck. And so if you flip it over like this, this will simulate this facing towards the outside of the truck. Take our other roll plate, lay that in position. Then we can take our lower bracket and bolt that to the bag. It's going to have two holes here, which line up with the holes in the bag. So we'll set that on, and then we're going to take these flat bolts. We'll have Allen key heads, and we're just going to get both of these started. Hand tight, that way we know everything's lined up. And once we've accomplished that, then we can come back and tighten and torque these down too. We can take our airbag, get ready to put it up under the truck. Before we do, this opening here on our lower bracket, take a carriage bolt, just run that through. Then there's going to be a Y-shaped cutout, and that's there for another carriage bolt. Put the head of the bolt in like that, and just drop it down. Now we can take our assembly, lift it on top of our axle, and to give you an idea, before we put it in, the carriage bolts are actually going to line up with the bolt holes here and that bracket it's going to rest on. So if you grab it and get the bolts lined up, get them to fall through, and again make sure that this portion is wrapping around that bracket like so. Now that we have it just resting in place, we can go on the other side of the bolts and get a couple of the nuts started. So here's where our carriage bolts came through on the other side of the axle. We're going to take a flange nut, get each one going hand tight. Now the other bolt is somewhat tricky to get to. It's kind of through this pocket here. So what I found, you take your flange nut and a 1/4 inch drive socket, 9/16 in size with an extension. You're kind of able to put that flange nut inside and kind of put it through there and get it started a little bit easier. Now we can go ahead and tighten and torque those two nuts. Now for our upper bracket, what we're going to do is again take a carriage bolt. We're going to get one on each corner of the bracket. Feed that up. Take a flange nut. Get it started hand tight. I'm going to use that same hardware combination for each corner. And we don't want to tighten them just yet because what we want to do, the majority of the time the bag's just going to naturally sit straight up and down. But we want to leave them hand tight. That way if we do need to kind of make an adjustment, either which way we can. In our case, it looks like the bag is sitting just about perfect, so we shouldn't have to really worry about that too much. With all of our upper bracket bolts in place, we can tighten them down and then get them torqued. Now that we have one airbag installed, we're just going to repeat that same process for the other side. And this is what it's going to look like. As I said, it's the same exact process with one exception. After you get your airbag assembly all installed, what you're going to do is take this included heat shield and a couple of the worm clamps and just clamp it to your exhaust where it is closest to the airbag. And this will just help dissipate the heat. That way it won't affect our airbag. At this point, you can run your airline. So the airline is going to come in one big bundle. You can simply just measure it and cut it in half. And then we can begin to plug it into the air fitting on top of the airbag. So when you do this, you want a really clean, straight, fresh cut. So you don't want to use a regular pair of snips to cut this. You want to use a utility knife, a tool like this, or even a airline tubing cutter. So we'll get a nice, clean, straight edge on it. You cut it, you want to examine it, make sure it looks good. Really good example there on how it should look. And at this point, to get it plugged in to the air fitting, really simple. Just push it in and push it all the way in. And what you're going to want to do is pull out on it to make sure it's completely seated, which it is. It's not coming out, not moving around. You know we're good. On the other end of the airline, we can run back to our bumper, and I'll go ahead and do that now and show you the path that I took to get there. The path that I took to run our airline just comes out right through here, through this opening. Now do your best to avoid any hot and moving parts. I just kind of went up and over our frame rail. Just use some zip ties to secure it along the way. And then right about this point, it goes to the inside of our frame rail. Here's where it comes up and over. Now keep in mind, at the end, we are going to put our spare tire back up in place, so just keep that in the back of your head while you're running your airlines. Comes over here, and I had a little bit of extra, so I kind of just coiled it up and zip tied it out of the way. And now for this end of our fitting, what you're going to do is take some of the hardware. First, going to take a hex nut and thread that on. And then we can create an opening in our bumper. That way we can push this through and get it secured. So I went ahead and drilled a small hole right here that's large enough for our Schrader valve to just fit through there. So we already have our hex nut on. We're then going to take a star washer, slide that on, you can push that through the hole, and then go around to the other side to get it secured. So here's where our Schrader valve comes out. What we're going to do is take the rubber washer, push that over it, followed by a flat washer. We can grab our hex nut and tighten that down. At this point, you could run your other airline, which I already have done, and I'll show you the path that I took to get our other fitting back here. So on this side, it's more or less the same route, it's the same path. The airline comes right out of the bag, kind of up and over, coming out right here, and up on top of the frame rail. Now there is a little thermal sleeve that they give you, and I went ahead and put this right here on the sharper bend. Just slides right over the tube. Run it down, on through here. Again, zip tying that extra wiring, or tubing rather, up. Doing that same method, drilling a hole, hex nut, star washer, poking it through, and securing it on the other side. Now what we can do with our airlines all ran is fill the bags up at there. That way we can check for any leaks. To check for leaks, you can just take some soapy water and spray down all of your fittings and connection points. And what we're looking for is for bubbles to be rapidly forming. And that'll indicate there is a leak. Here we don't see any, so we know we're good back here. And don't forget to check your connections back here at the airbag. Now these, if you do see a leak, what you would do is simply release all the air pressure out, pull your line out. To get the line out, you kind of push in and simultaneously kind of hold the fitting down and pull it out. You would cut the line again, making sure it's nice and clean, reinstall it, and fill it back up there and check it again. In our case, I don't see any bubbles, so we know we don't have any leaks. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 air spring kit on our 2019 Ram 1500 Classic.